Peace, 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 peace. I am Rami Salam El, Moorish American. I thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. We got an interesting one today. We are going to be dissecting and analyzing and discussing some of the things this author named Sam Harris talked about in regards to Islam. But before I get to that, I just want to make some things clear so that we have an understanding. We have a solid foundation that we're all understanding and working from. Cool? One, this video is not about me saying I'm right and Sam Harris is wrong. Even though I am going to show and I feel that Sam Harris is incorrect. But I'm not saying that what I believe or what I feel or what I think is the right thing and what Sam Harris thinks is the wrong thing. It's nuanced, but it's a difference between the right and wrong versus correct or incorrect. We're getting away from the personality. We're getting away from what someone believes or feels and just getting to the information. Feel me? Number two, this isn't about converting Sam Harris into a believer of Allah or God or Yahweh or Jah or, being a Muslim or following Islam. And it's not to convert you either or anyone else watching. That's not what this is for. And in fact, Islam, from my studies and what I understand, that there is no compulsion. There is no trying to force someone into becoming a Muslim or accepting Islam. That's something that you have to choose for yourself. Cool? What this is going to be is me presenting some things that Sam Harris has said himself. And then I'm going to present some information from other texts and other sources that challenges and corrects what Sam Harris said, in particular about Islam. So without further ado, let's get to the footage.
Conflict. A few thoughts on the notion of a Muslim golden age. I always find it telling when someone is arguing about how important Islamic civilization has been to the career of our species, that preserving the work of Aristotle always appears somewhere near the top of the list. I mean, just think about that for a second. Aristotle was great, don't get me wrong, but he's a single non-Muslim philosopher. And he wasn't perfect, right? I mean, he said many things that impeded the progress of science. I think his importance for future generations was primarily as a counterpoint to 1,000 years of Abrahamic religious craziness that practically ruined human history. And I count Christianity as the main offender here. Yes, it is true to say that a millennium ago, the Muslim world was ahead of the Christian West. But that doesn't say anything good about Islam. It's just a reminder of how terrible Christianity was. And as for the ultimate significance of Islamic civilization, yes, there were Muslims making advances in optics. I think Omer said this somewhere in his article, and one often hears this, but they weren't using these advances to build telescopes and understand the cosmos. They were using them to design religious calendars and more accurately pinpoint the direction of Mecca. Here's the basic fact that the Muslim community just has to grapple with. There are single zip codes in New York and Massachusetts that have produced more of enduring value, scientifically, artistically, ethically, politically, than the entire Muslim world has produced in 1,000 years. And if you think that claim is inaccurate, or that it contains a shred of bigotry, you are lying to yourself. Most of you have heard me mention the UN Arab Human Development Report, which revealed that the country of Spain translates more of the world's literature and learning into Spanish each year than the entire Arab world has translated into Arabic since the 9th century. And we're talking about Spain, which is not leading the world intellectually at the moment. Arabs, of course, are only 5% of the world population, but they produce only 1% of the world's books, and a higher percentage of those are religious than anywhere else. Again, that's just the Arab world, but do you really think that adding Indonesia and Malaysia and Iran to the list would suddenly make Islamic culture look as creative as Western culture, or indeed as Jewish culture? Let's run these numbers. Muslims outnumber Jews by 100 to 1. We can talk in round numbers here. There are 15 million Jews and 1.5 billion Muslims. In the last 10 years, in the last 100 years, which community has produced more of lasting value to humanity? Intellectually, artistically, or in any other way? Yeah, I'm talking about scientific breakthroughs. I'm talking about new businesses and museums and films, cures for diseases, new methods of purifying water, the good stuff. The good stuff beyond beating your wife or forcing her to live in a bag, or killing victims of rape, or performing clitorectomies on girls. You know, the other good stuff. If you are a so-called moderate Muslim, or a liberal, who is even now pulling the brakes on this train as it leaves the station, please don't pretend not to know the answer to this question. And don't pretend that answering it, or indeed asking it, is an expression of bigotry. This has nothing to do with Muslims being mistreated by the West. The Jews were nearly exterminated in the middle of the 20th century. They were victims of an actual genocide, as opposed to the imaginary genocides that we often hear about from Islamist apologists, describing the treatment of the Palestinians, for instance. Who knows how many brilliant and productive people were reduced to ash by the Nazis? Judging from the people who made it out, people who did more to establish our scientific worldview and literature and the arts than probably any other community in modern history, we probably lost some of the most intelligent and creative people who ever lived. And don't kid yourself that this has something to do with the resources either. Kuwait is a small, wealthy country that spends a lot of money on education. It is far below the world average in math and science, like 20% below. What do you think explains this? It is not historically inaccurate, nor is it a sign of bigotry, to observe that most of human progress arose in the West. Science is a Western breakthrough. Liberal democracy, the rule of law, equality before the law, freedom of thought and expression, a universal conception of human rights, separation of church and state. These are almost entirely Western inventions, and they are the foundations of almost everything that is good in our world. And when other cultures have adopted these values, like Japan and South Korea, they have flourished.
All right. Now, you've heard some things that Sam Harris has said, and before I get to it, I just want to be honest that I am doing my best to keep myself composed and to remove my personal feelings out of, this discussion, because I don't appreciate the way Sam Harris speaks about Islam or Muslims, and I don't appreciate the way he refers to Muslim wear, particular women, the cultural garb, burqas or hijabs, as bags, and I don't appreciate how he often tries to equate 9/11 to Muslims and jihadists, and using the very extreme examples of people who are saying they're doing these things in the name of Islam, or they're doing these things and they're proclaiming themselves to be a Muslim. And he picks out the most extreme examples and tries to use that and paint that as the whole of Islam. And just his entire mentality is really a great example of quote unquote white privilege. It's this mentality that the West is better, that, our way of life is the better way of life, and I know it because I'm right, and da-da-da-da-da, and will ramble off statistics and has this pompous, arrogant kind of vibe to him. And, even me doing this video, it started from listening to this podcast with Russell Brand, and the two brothers were having a discussion, and Russell Brand, in my estimation, was very, very, very good at pointing out the moments that he was trying to judge other people's culture and think that just because he feels it's this way, that it is the better way, and not even realizing that the same thing could be done in reverse. And then it's, oh, well, when Russell Brand did the same thing in reverse and flipped it back on him, oh, well, no, that's not fair, and it's da-da-da-da, and try to explain his way out of it. But then when Russell Brand is like, well, whoa, you can't really just judge that culture, and you don't have the necessarily the understanding of that culture like that. He's like, oh, well, yes, I, just that. And if you have lived in the United States, if you have dealt with European people that have grown up and lived in the U.S., especially if you were a quote-unquote person of color, so-called black person, so brown person, you know exactly this pompous, arrogant, and at the same time ignorant mentality that I'm speaking of. Enough of that. Let's get to the discussion. Okay. On the subject of 9/11, this is just something on a side note for Sam Harris, if Sam Harris is watching. This book is called Where Did the Towers Go? It's by a amazing person, Dr. Judy Wood. And I'm just going to read just a little brief situation, a little brief intro of the book so that you can understand why I'm even referring to this book. And I'll tie it all together. All right, here we go. Author's preface. For the record, I do not believe that our government is responsible for executing the events of 9/11, 2001, nor do I believe that our government is not responsible for executing the events of 9/11, 2001, or September 11, 2001. This is not a case of belief. This is a crime that should be solved by a forensic study of the evidence. Before it can be determined who did it, it must first be determined what was done and how it was done. The order of crime solving is to determine what happened, and then how it happened, and then who did it, and only then can we address why. And then a little bit further, she breaks down her background. My academic background in civil engineering, engineering mechanics, applied physics, materials engineering science, with experimental mechanics and I don't even know how to pronounce that. Interferometry being central to my research has provided me with very unique qualifications and expertise. My unique education and training put me in a position to where I could not ignore what I saw on 9/11. I waited for others to come forward, including those in official positions, photographers, media, journalists, and those with similar expertise as mine, but no one came forward. My conscience left me no other choice than to come forward myself and conduct forensic research into 9/11 based on the empirical evidence of this phenomena. Now, I'm not even going to get into the full book. I just wanted to read the academic background to show that Judy Wood is not some conspiracy theorist. This is not some YouTube book. This is a textbook of 500 pages, well-documented scientific studies, empirical data, evidence. And I would like for Sam Harris to investigate that, because he's always referencing 9/11 and how those extremists and they represent Islam and blah, 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 and tying that all together in that same old tired rhetoric. And if we're talking about the truth, not what we believe, right, Sam Harris? Well, then let's get to the facts of the matter, Sam Harris, and anyone else. And I also bring this up because I want to go to something Sam Harris said in the video. He said, please don't pretend not to know the answer to this question. It's very interesting. I love that statement. Please don't pretend not to know the answer to this question. So Sam Harris, I got a question for you. And please don't pretend to not know the answer to this question. Mr. Sam Harris. Mr. Sam Harris, what was the first Islamic movement in the United States? At least in modern history. Let's say the past 200 years, past 150 years, something like that. What was the first? Let me help you out. Islam for Dummies, Mr. Sam Harris. Page 248, Mr. Sam Harris. The Moorish Science Temple of America is the first explicitly Islamic movement in the United States. Timothy Drew, also known as Noble Drew Ali, This founder was born in 1886 in North Carolina. Why do I bring that up, Mr. Sam Harris? Have you ever spoken about Noble Drew Ali, Mr. Sam Harris? Especially in relation to Islam? Have you studied it? I want to read you something that Noble Drew Ali wrote in regards to Islam, because I think it's very important to this discussion we're having, this bill we're having. One moment. And this is coming from the Moorish Science Temple of America, the Moorish literature. This is information that Noble Drew Ali taught and passed around and circulated amongst all of the members about 100 years ago. Islam is the least appreciated and probably the most misunderstood of the world's great religions. This is especially true in our Western world. I'm going to read that sentence one more time. Islam is the least appreciated and probably the most misunderstood of the world's great religions. This is especially true in our Western world. Mr. Sam Harris, try to understand what Islam stands for and some of the things it has contributed to the world. Mr. Sam Harris. And one more thing. See, because Drew Ali is a very amazing person. He has a section in here that's titled, What is Islam? Please allow me to share just a little bit for you. Islam is a very simple faith. It requires man to recognize his duties towards God Allah, his creator, and his fellow creatures. It teaches the supreme duty of living at peace with one's surroundings. It is preeminently the religion of peace. The very name Islam means peace. The goal of a man's life, according to Islam, is peace with everything, peace with Allah, and peace with man. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, tells us that the final abode of man is the house of peace, where no vain word or sinful discourse will be heard. The holy divine prophet, Noble Drew Ali, says that a follower of Islam, here we go, a Muslim, a follower of Islam, in the true sense of the word, is one whose hands, tongue, and thoughts do not hurt others. Now, why do I read that, Mr. Sam Harris? You see, because you claim to have done so much studying on Islam, yet I've never heard you speak of Noble Drew Ali. I've never heard you reference what he wrote in regards to Islam. And why is that? Maybe is it because it makes it very clear and simple for everyone to understand that it's not this extremist, jihadist, Muslim radical terrorist that the U.S. propagates to the rest of the world and to the U.S. and the Western world especially? Could that be the reason, Mr. Sam Harris? And here's another thing. I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but when I did some research, I found out this Sam Harris is quote unquote Jewish. Well, at least via his mother, who is quote unquote Jewish or a Jew. Why is this important? Well, he references Jews in the previous clip that I played. And he says, and I quote, Jews suffered an actual genocide as opposed to imaginary genocides. And one of the peoples that he references in terms or implies that have an imaginary genocide are Palestinians. That's imaginary?
Last year, I traveled around the West Bank to release a series for the Empire Files on the plight of Palestinians, featuring their voices and stories. But I also went to speak to average Israelis in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. We're here in Zion Square in Jerusalem, which the government has actually declared to rename Tolerant Square. And we're just going to ask everyday Israelis what they think about the situation. You're American. Where are you from and why did you come here?
I'm from New York, and I came here with my family when I was younger to make Aliyah because it was always my parents' dream to come to Israel because we're religious.
So, are you American?
Yes.
Oh, cool. When did you move here and why?
I moved here 11 years ago. My family moved here because this is the country of the Jewish people and the future of the Jewish people, and we want to be here.
How old are you guys?
18.
We're 18 years old. Now we're here in Israel taking a leadership course, and we're going to the army for a few months to see how life's here. And then we hope to bring back some of this knowledge to our youth movements.
So you're like an internship with the army?
It's about 2 months, and they show you everything about the army.
Israel is a great place. It's a nice place. You should come and visit. I love Israel, and I feel safe here.
All that misconceptions are not true. Like, there's not people with knives every day, and there's not people exploding.
Palestinians?
Yeah. No, but pretty much the life here is really good.
For people living here, it's just normal to see people in the army walking around with guns, and you feel completely safe and protected.
I feel like we know who the threat is, and it's not coming from anyone random, as opposed to in the rest of the world that it could be anyone. Here we know who our enemy is, and we know that they are out to get us.
Who is the enemy?
Who's the enemy? That's a very good question. I don't think it's specifically any nation. I think it's the people that are so interested in being politically correct that they won't actually go after the people that are trying to cover things up.
I think that the Islam is it's a very bad disease, not just for Israel, for all around the world. We can see it. They think they all have to be Islam. If you're not Islam, they will kill you.
A lot of Americans don't really understand what Israel's like. We hear a lot of things in the news. A lot of people are sympathizing with the Palestinian plight. Can you talk about what it's like to kind of live in this situation?
First of all, it's very hard. I'm in an organization. It's called Lahava. It's against the Jews shouldn't marry Arabs.
Did you say the organization did what again?
The organization is, the thing of it is that Jews shouldn't marry Arabs.
Shouldn't marry Arabs. Why do you feel strongly about that?
Because Jews is a special nation that God gave it to the Jews, and we don't want Jews to get mixed up with it, together with a different nation.
I think Israelis have to take over, and they have to kick them away. It will be much better not to kill them, just to go back to Arab countries.
You can't deal with these people. There's no need to try. There's no need to talk to them. What we can do is when they do enough harm, we retaliate. That's war, and that's the situation that any Jew who lives in Israel has to deal with.
אוקיי, בסדר בעברית? פשוט מאוד, צריך להיכנס לשטחים, וכל מחבל שעושה פיגוע צריך להרוג אותו, צריך להרוג את המחבלים, ואז הם יפחדו ולא יעשו לנו בעיות, והכל יהיה בסדר. הם יהיו בכפרים שלהם, אנחנו נחיה פה, לא צריך להיות ביחד, והכל בסדר.
I think also that every Arab that doing a terrorism attack, we have to kill him, and not because he's an Arab, because he's a terrorist. I think you should also kick out the family, because it all begins with chinuch. How you say it?
Education.
Whatever they teach the kids does. You know, it's families.
I'm think that we need to... איך אומרים להעיף את הערבים? כן, תגידי לי את המילה הזאת. נו, תגידי לי מילים, אני לא...
אני לא יודעת לתרגם. I don't know how to translate. really well.
I think we should give them a country. If you're doing any problem, you just go in there to give them a country, and then it's going to be a war between countries, you know? If they're going to throw rockets, we're going to throw one big one and done.
I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way, like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it. Like, or try to stop them a different way. It never worked.
You mean all Arabs or Gaza or...
I believe that they, like, I hope to believe they're not, but I do think they are, because I don't trust them. You can't trust them, and that's the only way I believe that. The only way is just to stop it completely.
I think that we're miserable. The Arabs make a piguim, and we need to kill Arabs.
Okay.
We'll talk about this later.
All right, cool. Well,
there is also Jewish civilians that hate Arabs. Yeah, I'm not saying, but we have also people that like the Arabs and everything, like Smolanim.
I think another thing that the Jews should have rights to hate them. I think we have the right to hate them. I don't see a reason why not. I wouldn't trust any of them.
To better understand this mentality, I also talked to Ronnie Barkan, a Jewish Israeli citizen who grew up in the country and is now an ardent critic of the notion of a Jewish state.
Like anyone growing up in Israel, I went through the whole indoctrination mechanism. And we are being trained to be soldiers from kindergarten, literally from kindergarten. The moment I realized I managed to sort of overcome that indoctrination, then everything became very clear, because the situation is crystal clear. One of the main successes of Israeli propaganda is to convince the world that the situation is complicated. But it's far from being complicated. It's probably the least complicated conflict in the world today. And it's all about basically those who have the power, those who oppress and subjugate and tread over the indigenous people of the land who have been oppressed and subjugated and expelled from their land. And this is what it's about. The situation here is not very different other than the way it is perceived in the world and among Israeli society themselves. They like to perceive themselves as being something else, as being, you know, liberal and progressive and all of that. And I also thought of myself as such until I realized that actually, no, this is not the case. The case is very clear, and I'm not on the right side of history. And that's when, you know, the moment I managed to overcome this type of brainwashing, then the rest was very easy. The State of Israel is all about creating a place which is for one select group and only that.
See, this goes right back into that white privilege, that quote-unquote white privilege, that arrogance to think that what I believe and the way I see the world is the right way. And that arrogance allows Sam Harris and other people to say such a thing as, well, the Jews experienced an actual genocide, whereas the Palestinians, that's just imaginary stuff. You know how disrespectful that is? Do you believe the hundreds of thousands, probably millions of Palestinians that have been killed and murdered? Is that really imaginary? Really? How would you feel if someone said that the Holocaust was imaginary, or it didn't happen the way it was told to us that it happened? I'm pretty sure that you would claim they were anti-Semitic. Pretty sure that the, all of the Jewish, the Anti-Defamation Jewish League, pretty sure that they would be all over that, wouldn't they? Got to think about what we're saying, Mr. Sam Harris.
Let me work. Please let me work. Get that water. He about to get this work. He about to get this work. Hold up.
Okay. We're going to close it up with just a few more pieces of information that I would like to share to Sam Harris and anyone else watching. Because earlier he mentioned Aristotle and how, in the golden age of Islam, one of the key things that is mentioned is that they preserve the work of Aristotle. And, that's not really saying much and blah, 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 blah. Something like that. Just wanted to read something. It's It's from this book called Stolen Legacy, Greek Philosophy is Stolen Egyptian Philosophy by George G.M. James. This is the book. And I just, what did I open up? Page 2. Yes, page 2. The history of Aristotle's life has done him far more harm than good, since it carefully avoids any statement relating to his visit to Egypt, either on his own account or in company with Alexander the Great when he invaded Egypt. This silence of history at once throws doubt upon the life and achievements of Aristotle. He is said to have spent 20 years under the tutorship of Plato, who is regarded as a philosopher, yet he graduated as the greatest of scientists of antiquity. The two questions might be asked. How could Plato teach Aristotle what he himself did not know? And why should Aristotle spend 20 years under a teacher from whom he can learn nothing? This bit of history sounds incredible. And I'm going to stop right there, because if you read the book, you understand where it's going. The fact of the matter is that, quote-unquote, Greek philosophy, Greek mysteries, mythology, all of that comes from Egypt. One of the, oh man, I wish I had the book. Hermes Trismegistus, right? Something like that. Hermes. Look that up. Said to come out of Greek. When you do a little digging, you find out that that's actually Thoth, Thoth, from Egypt. And if you read further in Stolen Legacy, you understand that when Egypt was being invaded, that some of those brothers and the people that had the information took it and hid in other countries and preserved the information. And at a certain time, came out of hiding and spread that information. And guess who was integral and very key in helping to preserve that information during that time where it was being kept hidden and kept safe from being ransacked by the barbarous people that was invading Egypt? It was Moors. Moors that were preserving the culture and were the custodians of the culture, and then spread that culture to the rest of the world, including Spain. That brings me to the final point. Moorish Spain. Richard Fletcher, author of The Quest for El Cid. Page 1. Sam Harris. And you did mention Spain and how they were, I believe you were saying, translating a lot of the works. And anyways. The early 8th century conquest signaled the beginnings of an Islamic presence in the Iberian Peninsula that would endure for the better part of 1,000 years, and whose impress upon peninsular culture is still discernible. What is more, Islamic Spain will come in time to offer the fruits of a higher civilization to barbarian Europe beyond the Pyrenees. European acceptance of this legacy, hesitant at first, and then full-hearted, decisively affected Western culture, not just in Europe, but also in those new worlds discovered and settled by Europeans in the early modern period. So much may be said to have stemmed from Tariq's raid. That is why, in the last resort, Moorish Spain is worth trying to understand. Now, how does this all tie together? Well, if you simply look it up in the encyclopedia, dictionary, you'll come to find out that Moors, in the term Moors and the term Muslim, was used and is used interchangeably. So, Moorish Spain or Muslim or Islamic Spain. And the things that the Moors brought to Spain, or the Muslims brought to Spain, has influenced Western civilization. And not just in Europe, but the quote-unquote New Worlds, which would be Yes, Sam Harris. Yes. America. Yes. Yes. So what am I saying? I'm saying that Sam Harris is incorrect. That the golden age of Islam, that the things that the Moors, the Muslims, the Islamic culture brought to the world is incalculably great. It's too much. It's too much to truly understand, especially when you try to dismiss it and disregard it and try to omit it from the history. Don't do that, Sam Harris. Please stop what you're doing. Respect our culture, because Islam is the culture and the way of life that came from my ancient forefathers and foremothers. Yes. And so I do feel an obligation, I do feel a duty to make sure that people have a certain level of respect for it. That's just me. Thank you for watching. You have a great day. Peace.